My name is Cecil. I am 32 years old, and I work as a software engineer in Pittsburgh. Growing up, I lived in the shadow of my perfect older brother, Austin. From childhood trophies to college acceptances, Austin could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. For years, I endured the comparisons, the dismissive looks, and the emotional neglect. Then came that Thanksgiving dinner when everything changed. My mother sneered those familiar words across the table, but this time, something inside me snapped. Before I dive into how I finally stood up to my parents after 30 years, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt compared to someone else in your family. I grew up in a modest 2-story house in a middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. Our lawn was always neatly trimmed, our driveway always shoveled in winter, and our family photos always perfectly arranged on the mantel. To outsiders, we were the picture-perfect American family. My father, Harold, worked as an accountant at a respectable firm downtown, putting in 60-hour weeks during tax season. My mother, Diane, was an elementary school teacher, beloved by her students and respected by her colleagues. And then there was my brother, Austin, 4 years. My senior, the golden child of the family. My earliest memories are tinted with the subtle but unmistakable difference in how my parents treated us. When Austin brought home an A-, there would be celebration dinners at our favorite restaurant. When I brought home straight, as there would be a pat on the head and a quick, "Good job. But did you see your brother made the varsity team as a freshman?" It was like this for as long as I can remember. Our living room walls told the story better than I ever could. They were adorned with Austin's football trophies, baseball medals, academic certificates, and newspaper clippings of his achievements. My own accomplishments, fewer as they may have been, were relegated to the refrigerator door, temporary displays that would be replaced by grocery lists and dentist appointment reminders within days. I remember when I was 9 years old, I won first place in the school science fair with a computer program. I had coded myself a simple game that taught basic math through interactive puzzles. It had taken me weeks of after-school work learning from library books, since we did not have internet at home yet. The day I won, I rushed home. Blue ribbon clutched in my small hand, bursting through the front door to share my news. "Mom, Dad, I won first place in the science fair." I shouted, my voice echoing through our house. My mother looked up from preparing dinner, a fleeting smile crossing her face. "That is nice, honey. Put your ribbon on the counter." My father barely looked up from his newspaper. "Good job," he muttered. Then the front door opened again. Austin strode in his varsity jacket, making him look older than his 13 years. "We won the division championship," he announced. "Coach says I made the winning tackle." My parents erupted in excitement. My father tossed aside his newspaper, and my mother abandoned the half-chopped vegetables. They surrounded Austin, peppering him with questions about the game, asking for play-by-play details. My blue ribbon sat forgotten on the counter, eventually getting splashed with spaghetti sauce. That night, we went out for ice cream to celebrate Austin's victory. My science fair win was not mentioned again. As I grew older, I discovered a passion for computers and programming. While Austin excelled at sports and conventional academics, I found myself drawn to the logical yet creative world of code. I would spend hours in the school computer lab, teaching myself programming languages, creating small applications, and solving problems. The computer lab became my sanctuary, a place where my worth was not measured against my brother's accomplishments, but by what I could create with my own mind. Mr. Rodriguez, the computer science teacher, noticed my interest and began giving me additional resources and projects. "You have a natural talent for this, Cecil," he told me one afternoon after I had debugged a particularly challenging program. "This could take you places." I held on to those words like a lifeline, a rare validation that what I loved doing actually mattered. At home, I developed coping mechanisms to deal with the constant comparison. I learned to celebrate my achievements privately, to find satisfaction in the process, rather than the recognition. I built a shell around my disappointment when my parents would miss my computer club competitions to attend Austin's football games. I told myself it did not matter, but the weight of their absence grew heavier with each empty chair in the audience where my parents should have been. By the time I reached middle school, the seeds of inadequacy had taken deep root in my psyche. I began to internalize the message that my interests and talents were somehow less valuable, less worthy of attention and praise. But alongside that damaging belief grew something else. A determination to excel in my own way, to carve out my own path, even if it would never receive the applause that seemed to follow my brother effortlessly. High school only widened the chasm between how my parents viewed Austin and me. By this point, Austin had become the school valedictorian captain of both the football and debate teams, and had secured a full-ride scholarship to Princeton. His graduation was treated like a national holiday in our household. My parents invited extended family from across the country, rented out a local restaurant for a celebration, and my father gave a 20-minute toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes except mine. Meanwhile, I was finding my own path, though it was largely invisible to my family. I struggled with subjects like literature and history, not because I could not understand them, but because they failed to capture my interest the way computer science did. In my junior year, I joined the newly formed computer club and quickly became its most active member. Under the guidance of Mr. Finch, a former software developer turned teacher, I flourished. You have a way of seeing problems that most people do not. Mr. Finch told me after I had created a scheduling program that the school administration ended up implementing. You do not just solve the problem in front of you, you anticipate problems no one else has considered yet. While my grades in other subjects hovered around B- territory in computer science, I was off the charts. Mr. Finch had to create additional assignments just to challenge me. By senior year, I had built a rudimentary social networking platform specifically for our school, allowing students to connect, share, study resources, and coordinate club activities. When I showed it to my parents, hoping for even a fraction of the enthusiasm they had shown for Austin's achievements, my father glanced at it briefly and said, "That is nice, but when are you going to focus on getting your math grade up?" Austin never got anything lower than an A- in math. My mother added, "Computers are fine as a hobby, Cecil, but you need something more substantial for college applications. Why not try out for debate, like your brother did?" I stopped sharing my projects with them after that. The summer before my senior year, I completed my most significant project, yet a predictive algorithm that helped local businesses forecast inventory needs based on historical sales data and local events. A small grocery store near our school implemented it, and the owner, Mr. Patel, was so impressed that he paid me $500 and wrote a glowing recommendation letter. When the local newspaper ran a small piece about it, featuring a picture of me and Mr. Patel shaking hands in front of his store, my parents' reaction was lukewarm at best. "That is nice, honey," my mother said, placing the newspaper at the bottom of a pile of mail. "Did you finish applying to those colleges we talked about?" The colleges we had talked about were all the ones Austin had applied to: prestigious Ivy League schools with strong liberal arts programs but mediocre computer science departments. "I am thinking about State University," I said cautiously over dinner one night. "They have one of the best computer science programs in the country." The silence that followed was deafening. My father put down his fork, an expression of disbelief crossing his face. "State, are you serious? With your grades, you would be lucky if they accepted you." But that is not the point. No one in our family has ever settled for a state school. "Austin is thriving at Princeton," my mother chimed in. "The connections he is making there will last a lifetime. Why would you not want that for yourself?" "Because I am not Austin," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "And State has the program I want. This computer thing is just a phase," my father dismissed with a wave of his hand. "You will thank us later, when you have a real degree from a real school." I applied to State University anyway in secret. When the thick acceptance package arrived along with a partial scholarship based on my programming portfolio, I felt a surge of pride and validation. For once I had charted my own course, independent of Austin's shadow. When I finally told my parents about my decision, my father's disappointment was palpable. "I suppose it is better than community college," he muttered. My mother tried a different approach. "Austin says the computer science department at Princeton is expanding. Maybe you could transfer after a year." I stood my ground. "I am going to state, my decision is final." As I packed for college that August, I felt a mixture of anxiety and liberation. For the first time, I would be building a life completely separate from the constant comparison to Austin. What I did not realize then was that physical distance would not be enough to escape the family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. State University turned out to be exactly what I needed. From the moment I set foot on campus, I felt like I could breathe for the first time. Here, no one knew Austin. No one had expectations of me based on his accomplishments. I was judged solely on my own merits, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. My freshman year roommate, Jack, was a computer engineering major from Seattle who became my first true friend. Unlike the surface-level friendships I had maintained in high school, Jack and I connected on a deeper level. We would stay up until dawn discussing everything from programming ethics to philosophy to our favorite science fiction novels. He saw me the real me, not as someone's less impressive brother. "You know you apologize way too much," he pointed out one night as we were debugging a project together. "You just fixed a problem I have been stuck on for 3 days, then apologized for not finding it sooner." I had never noticed this habit before. But once Jack pointed it out, I could not stop seeing it. Years of feeling like I was never quite good enough had trained me to preemptively apologize for my existence. In my sophomore year, I took an advanced algorithms class with Professor Larson, a pioneer in artificial intelligence, who had worked at major tech companies before returning to academia. After I submitted my first project, he asked me to stay after class. "Have you considered focusing on AI and machine learning?" he asked, gesturing to my assignment. "Your approach to this problem shows an intuitive understanding of pattern recognition that cannot be taught." Under Professor Larson's mentorship, I began to specialize in AI applications, particularly in predictive behavior models. By junior year, I was helping him with his research and co-authoring a paper that would eventually be published in a respected industry journal. Meanwhile, back home, Austin had graduated with honors from Princeton and accepted a position at a prestigious management consulting firm in New York. According to my parents' frequent updates, he had a corner office, an expense account, and was on track to make partner in record time. What they did not mention, but I discovered during a rare phone call with Austin himself, was that he hated every minute of it. "The money is good," he admitted, his voice tinged with an unfamiliar weariness. "But sometimes I wonder if this is really what I wanted, or what Mom and Dad wanted for me." It was the first time Austin had ever expressed anything other than perfect alignment with our parents' expectations, and it caught me off guard. Before I could respond meaningfully, he changed the subject, asking about my studies in that slightly condescending tone that had always characterized our interactions. During my senior year, I began freelancing, building custom applications for small businesses and startups. My portfolio grew, as did my confidence and bank account. When a tech startup in Pittsburgh offered me a junior developer position before I had even graduated, I accepted immediately. The starting salary was modest compared to what Austin was making. But it was more than enough for me to rent a small apartment in a trendy part of the city and begin building my independent adult life. More importantly, it was a job I genuinely loved, working with technologies that excited me. When I called my parents to share the news, their reaction was predictably underwhelming. "A startup?" my father questioned. "Those things fold all the time. What about job security?" "Playing with computers all day hardly seems like a career," my mother added. Austin just got another promotion, you know. His company values real business acumen. I had expected this response, but it still stung. I am not playing with computers, Mom. I am building software that helps businesses operate more efficiently. Well, I suppose it is a start, my father conceded reluctantly. Maybe after a few years you can transition into management like your brother. Later that same year, my father suffered a minor heart attack. It was not life-threatening, but it required surgery and several weeks of recovery. Medical bills began to pile up, and though they never explicitly asked, I sensed the financial strain my parents were under. Without telling them, I began sending money home $1,000 each month, sometimes more when I could manage it. I addressed the envelopes to both parents and included no note, no conditions. It was not about recognition. It was simply the right thing to do. As my career progressed over the next few years, so did my financial contributions to my parents. By the time I was 27, I had moved to a major tech company where my salary had more than tripled. The monthly checks I sent home increased accordingly, though my parents never acknowledged receiving them. In our infrequent phone calls and even rarer visits, they continued to hold up Austin as the model of success, seemingly oblivious to the fact that I was now financially comfortable in my own right. What they did not know was that while I was thriving, Austin's perfect life was beginning to unravel. 5 years into my career, my trajectory had exceeded even my own expectations. After proving myself at the startup, I was headhunted by Tech Fusion, one of the largest tech companies in the country. My expertise in AI and predictive algorithms made me a valuable asset, and my salary reflected that value. I was leading a team of developers creating software that was changing how businesses operated across multiple industries. I purchased my first home at 29, a modern 3-bedroom townhouse in one of Pittsburgh's most desirable neighborhoods. I had a retirement account that was growing steadily, investments that were performing well, and enough disposable income to travel internationally twice a year. By any objective measure, I was successful. Yet in my parents' eyes, I remained the lesser son. During a visit home for Christmas that year, my mother proudly showed me Austin's latest company portrait prominently displayed in the living room. He manages over 50 people now, she beamed. What she did not mention was that Austin had been passed over for partner for the second time, information he had shared with me during a rare moment of vulnerability, or that his marriage was showing signs of strain due to his 70-hour work weeks, or that he had started drinking more heavily than was healthy. Meanwhile, my financial support of my parents had become substantial. My father had retired earlier than planned due to his heart condition, and my mother had reduced her teaching hours. Their pension and retirement savings were insufficient to maintain their lifestyle, but the money I sent allowed them to stay in their home and continue living comfortably. I never mentioned these contributions during our conversations. It was not about leverage or recognition. It was about taking care of the people who had raised me, regardless of how they had made me feel growing up. Still, a part of me hoped that eventually they would acknowledge this support, that they would see I had become a successful adult in my own right. Then came the phone call that would begin to unravel everything. Cecil, my mother's voice sounded strained over the phone. Your father needs a new procedure. The insurance will only cover 60%. I did not hesitate. How much do you need? $12,000. I would not ask, but I will transfer it today, I said, cutting her off. Take care of Dad. Do not worry about the money. There was a pause. Thank you, she said. And for a moment, I thought I detected genuine appreciation in her voice. Austin said he would help too. But you know how expensive New York Island. He has his mortgage and the kids' private school tuition. And, just like that, the moment was gone. Even when accepting a significant financial gift from me, she felt the need to make excuses for why Austin was not contributing. What my mother did not know, what none of us knew then, was that Austin's perfect life was a house of cards on the verge of collapse. While I was building a solid career and financial foundation, Austin had been making increasingly desperate choices to maintain the appearance of success. 3 months after I sent the money for my father's procedure, I received a surprising call from Austin himself. "I lost my job," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "They found discrepancies in some of my expense reports. I have been let go." I was shocked. This was not the Austin I knew, the golden boy who played by all the rules. "What happened?" "It is a long story," he deflected. "I have been staying with Mom and Dad while I figure things out. They think I am working remotely." "Does anyone else know?" I asked. "No, and I would appreciate if you kept it that way. I will bounce back. I always do." I agreed to keep his secret, though it troubled me deeply. In the following weeks, I increased the amount I was sending home, assuming my parents now had an additional adult to support. During this time, my own career continued to flourish. I was promoted to Senior Development Director, overseeing critical projects with budgets in the millions. I was invited to speak at industry conferences and had been approached about writing a book on AI applications in business. When I called home to share news of my promotion, my mother seemed distracted. "That is nice, dear. Did you know Austin is considering starting his own consulting firm? He says he could make twice what he was making before." I bit my tongue knowing the truth, but unable to share it without betraying my brother's confidence. The gap between reality and the narrative my parents clung to was widening into an unbridgeable chasm. As the months passed, the requests for money became more frequent. My father needed specialized physical therapy not covered by insurance. The house needed a new roof. Property taxes had increased. Each time I sent what was asked for without question, often more. Then my mother called with a request that made me pause. "Austin is looking at investing in a business opportunity," she explained. "He needs $30,000 for the initial investment. Your father and I have put in 20, but we are a bit short. Could you help? Austin says the returns will be substantial." For the first time, I hesitated. What kind of business opportunity? "Oh, something in finance. You know how brilliant your brother is with these things." I did not send the money immediately. Instead, I called Austin directly. "What is this business opportunity Mom mentioned?" I asked without preamble. The long silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. "It is complicated," he finally said. "But it is a sure thing. I just need some capital to get it off the ground." "Are Mom and Dad investing their retirement money in this?" Another pause. "They believe in me." I felt a surge of anger. "They have always believed in you, Austin. That is not the issue. The issue is whether you are taking advantage of that belief. You have no idea what it is like," he snapped, "to be the one they expect everything from, the one who cannot fail." The conversation ended badly, with both of us angry and resentful. I did not send the $30,000, but I did call my parents' financial advisor, an old friend of my father's, to express my concerns. He promised to look into it and dissuade them if the investment seemed questionable. 2 weeks later, I received a cold email from my mother. "We are very disappointed in your lack of support for your brother's endeavors. Austin has always supported you." I stared at those words for a long time, a hollow laugh eventually escaping me. The irony was almost too much to bear. I, who had been sending thousands of dollars home every month for years, was being accused of not being supportive, while Austin, who, as far as I knew, had never contributed a dime to our parents' well-being, was held up as the supportive son. It was then that I decided to come home for Thanksgiving to see with my own eyes what was happening with my family. I had no idea that this decision would lead to the confrontation that would change everything. The drive to my parents' house that Thanksgiving morning was filled with a sense of foreboding. 5 years had passed since I had last been home for a holiday, usually claiming work commitments to avoid the inevitable comparisons and subtle put-downs. But this time felt different. I needed to see firsthand what was happening with my family, particularly with Austin. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, though, perhaps a bit more worn around the edges. The lawn, once meticulously maintained by my father, had patches of brown, and the gutters sagged in places. Small signs of neglect that spoke volumes about my parents' current situation. My mother answered the door, her face lighting up with genuine surprise. "Cecil, you did not tell us you were coming." She embraced me stiffly, as if remembering her recent disappointment in me. "Last-minute decision," I explained, following her into the house. The familiar scent of turkey and pumpkin pie filled the air, mixing with the faint smell of furniture polish and old books that had always characterized my childhood home. My father was in his usual armchair, looking older and frailer than I had expected. He struggled to his feet when he saw me, and I noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he extended one for a handshake. "Son," he said simply, and I was struck by how that one word could carry so much complex emotion, from distant affection to lingering disappointment. "How are you feeling, Dad?" I asked, genuinely concerned by his appearance. "Better," he replied. "The new medication is helping." My mother interjected. "Austin has been such a help. He drives your father to all his appointments, manages his medications. We do not know what we would do without him." I nodded, biting back the question of why Austin was not at his supposed high-powered job in New York. Instead, I asked, "When will Austin get here?" A look passed between my parents. "He is just upstairs," my mother said. "He has been staying with us for a while now. His company is allowing him to work remotely." The lie hung in the air between us. I wondered how long they had been telling it to others and to themselves. Thanksgiving dinner was a larger affair than I had anticipated. My mother had invited my Aunt Linda and Uncle Paul, my father's brother, along with their 2 teenage children. My mother's sister Kate was there with her husband Jim. It seemed like everyone in the extended family had been gathered, perhaps to witness my rare appearance at a family function. Austin came downstairs just as everyone was taking their seats at the dining room table. He looked terrible. His once athletic frame had grown soft, his face puffy with dark circles under his eyes. He wore an expensive watch and designer clothes that seemed at odds with his unkempt appearance. "Little brother," he greeted me with forced cheerfulness. "The prodigal son returns." I embraced him briefly, noticing the slight smell of alcohol on his breath despite it being only 3 in the afternoon. As we all settled around the table, the familiar family dynamics immediately reasserted themselves. My mother fussed over Austin, making sure he had the best pieces of turkey, complimenting him on his appearance despite the obvious signs of strain. My father engaged him in conversation about the stock market and politics, seeking and valuing his opinions. Meanwhile, I fielded polite but disinterested questions about my computer job from various relatives, none of whom seemed to grasp what I actually did for a living. "Cecil works with computers," my mother explained dismissively when my cousin asked about my career. "Austin, tell everyone about the new project you are consulting on." Austin launched into a vague description of a consulting project that sounded impressive but lacked any specific details. I watched the faces around the table, all rapt with attention, nodding appreciatively at appropriate moments. They believed every word. The conversation then turned to my cousin Thomas's college applications. "He is hoping for Princeton," Aunt Linda said proudly. "We told him to talk to Austin about the alumni interview process." "Absolutely," Austin agreed smoothly. "I still have connections there." Cecil went to state. My mother added her tone, making it clear this was a consolation prize rather than an achievement. I took a deep breath. State has one of the top computer science programs in the country. It was exactly right for what I wanted to do. "Of course, dear," my mother patted my hand condescendingly. "Not everyone can handle the pressure of an Ivy League education." I felt my jaw tighten, but said nothing. This was familiar territory, and I had long ago learned that defending myself only prolonged these uncomfortable exchanges. As the meal progressed, I noticed something troubling. Austin kept glancing at his phone, becoming increasingly agitated. He excused himself several times, returning each time looking more stressed than before. During one of his absences, I overheard my mother telling Aunt Kate about Austin's investment opportunity and how they had put a significant amount of money into it. It is going to pay for their retirement. And then some, my mother said confidently. Austin has always had a head for business. When Austin returned, the conversation shifted to my lack of settling down. Cecil still has not found a nice girl, my mother told the table at large. Austin was already married with his first child on the way at his age. Austin's wife and children were conspicuously absent from this gathering, I realized. Another question I carefully avoided asking. I am focused on my career right now, I said evenly. Speaking of which, I just led the development of a new AI system that increased our clients' efficiency by 40%. That is nice, my father said absently. Austin, tell them about the property you are looking at in the Hamptons. And so it went for nearly 2 hours. Every accomplishment of mine minimized every fictional achievement of Austin's, amplified and celebrated. It was exactly what I had expected, and yet it still had the power to wound me. The breaking point came during dessert. Austin had disappeared yet again, and I had stepped into the kitchen to help my mother serve the pumpkin pie. As I reached for the plates, she fixed me with a disapproving look. I wish you would be more supportive of your brother, she said. He is going through a difficult time, though he would never complain about it. Something in me snapped. Supportive, Mom, I have been sending you and Dad money every month for years, thousands of dollars. Where do you think your new roof came from? Dad's medical bills. The property tax you complained was so high last year. She looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? We have never received any money from you. I stared at her, speechless. The checks, I finally managed. I have been sending checks addressed to both you and Dad for over 5 years now. Cecil, she said slowly, as if explaining something to a child, we have never received a single check from you. Austin has been helping us financially, especially since your father's health declined. I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. It was not possible. I had bank records, canceled checks. Someone had been cashing those checks. And if it was not my parents? We returned to the dining room, my mind racing. Austin was back at the table, looking increasingly disheveled. My mother, apparently deciding to put our strange kitchen conversation behind us, raised her glass in a toast. To our family, especially our Austin, who has always been our rock and provider. The relatives murmured in agreement, lifting their glasses. And to Cecil, she added, as an afterthought, who finally made time to join us. Perhaps someday you will be as successful and dependable as your brother. You will never be as good as your brother. My father added with a shake of his head, the wine making him more loose-tongued than usual. But we love you anyway. The room fell silent, even the relatives seeming to recognize that this had gone too far. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. If Austin is so successful and dependable, I said, my voice steady despite the rage and hurt boiling inside me, then tell him to pay all the bills. I am not sending money anymore. My mother's face registered shock. What money? We never received a single dollar from you. Do not try to make yourself the hero of this family. When you have been absent for years, check your statements, I said, pulling out my phone. I have records of every check I have sent. $60,000 over the past 5 years. Made out to Harold and Diane Marshall. Every single one cashed. My father looked confused. That is not possible. We never received any checks from you. I turned to Austin, whose face had gone completely white. Where is the money? Austin. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to my brother, who seemed to physically shrink under the collective gaze. I do not know what he is talking about, Austin said weakly. Cecil is just jealous like always. I pulled up my banking app and walked around the table, showing my father the record of checks. Look at the endorsement signatures, Dad. Are those yours? My father put on his reading glasses with trembling hands. He studied the screen, his face growing increasingly pale. These look like my signature. But I never. He looked up at Austin, understanding dawning in his eyes. Son. Austin seemed to collapse in on himself. I was going to pay it back, he whispered. All of it. Once my investments paid off. What investments? My mother asked, her voice small and frightened. There are no investments, I said quietly. Are there, Austin? The confession, when it finally came, was devastating in its simplicity. Austin had been intercepting my checks for years, forging our parents' signatures and using the money to maintain the illusion of his success while feeding a gambling addiction that had cost him his job, his marriage, and nearly his family. I just needed to keep up appearances, he said through tears. Everyone expected so much from me. The golden boy. The successful one. I could not let you all see that I had failed. My mother sat frozen, her face, a mask of disbelief and betrayal. My father looked suddenly older, the weight of this revelation aging him before our eyes. I think I should go, I said quietly, the anger draining from me, replaced by a profound sadness for all of us trapped in roles we had never chosen. As I walked to the door, no one tried to stop me. The last thing I heard as I closed the door behind me was my mother's broken voice, asking Austin, "How could you do this to us?" In the cold November air, I took my first full breath in what felt like hours. Something had broken in that dining room, but something else. Something that had been suffocating me for 32 years had finally been set free. The days following Thanksgiving were a blur of emotions and revelations. I returned to my townhouse in Pittsburgh and took a week off work, something I had never done without careful planning before. I needed time to process what had happened, to understand the full scope of Austin's deception and my parents' unwitting role in it. 3 days after the confrontation, my phone rang. It was Austin. "Can we talk?" His voice sounded hollow, defeated. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop halfway between my place and our parents' house. When I arrived, I barely recognized him. Gone was any pretense of the successful executive. In his place sat a man in a worn sweatshirt and jeans, looking older than his 36 years. "I owe you an explanation," he began as soon as I sat down. "And an apology, though I know that is not enough." Over the next 2 hours, Austin laid bare the extent of his deception. It had started small, he explained. After being passed over for promotion the first time, he had begun gambling to cope with the stress and disappointment. Small bets at first, then larger ones, as the losses mounted. "I intercepted one of your checks by accident," he admitted. "It was in the mail pile when I was visiting Mom and Dad. I was desperate, about to lose my apartment. I told myself I would just borrow it, pay it back when I won. But he never won enough, and the deception continued. When he lost his job, not because of expense report discrepancies, as he had told me, but because he had been caught embezzling from client accounts to cover gambling debts, he moved back in with our parents. By then, intercepting my checks had become routine. They never knew, he insisted. I would tell them I was covering the bills, being the good son. They believed me because they always believed in me." He laughed bitterly. "The golden child. Your wife and kids?" I asked, realizing I had not heard any mention of them in years. Austin's eyes filled with tears. "Gone. Tiffany left 2 years ago, took the kids to her parents in California. I have limited visitation rights. Another failure. I could not admit to anyone. I sat back trying to absorb the magnitude of Austin's fall from grace. What about the gambling? Are you still? Trying to stop, he said. I have been to a few Gamblers Anonymous meetings, but then I slip. The debt collectors are calling daily now. I owe nearly $100,000 to some very dangerous people. And our parents put $20,000 into your non-existent investment, I added. He nodded miserably. I used it to pay off the most pressing debts, the ones where people were threatening to break my legs. As angry as I was, I could see the broken man before me was already suffering the consequences of his actions. My brother, the person I had spent my life being compared to and found wanting, had been living a lie while I had built something real. After meeting with Austin, I began investigating the full extent of the financial damage. I hired a forensic accountant who specialized in cases of family financial fraud. What she uncovered was worse than I had imagined. Beyond intercepting my checks, Austin had opened credit cards in our parents' names, taken out a second mortgage on their house, and emptied a significant portion of their retirement accounts. All told, he had stolen or misappropriated nearly $300,000, most of which had gone to cover gambling debts or maintain his facade of success. The most shocking discovery came when I met with my parents' supposed financial advisor, the family friend my father had trusted for decades. He had no record of my call expressing concerns about Austin's investment opportunity. In fact, he had not actively managed my parents' accounts for years, having turned most of the communication over to his assistant. An assistant who it turned out was a drinking buddy of Austin's. When I presented this information to my parents sitting in their living room a week after Thanksgiving, their reactions were painfully different. My father, always the pragmatist, wanted to understand the full extent of the damage and what could be done to repair it. My mother, however, cycled between denial and blame. There must be some misunderstanding, she insisted. Austin would never deliberately hurt us. Perhaps he was coerced, or he made a mistake. Mom, I said gently. He forged your signatures on checks and loan documents for years. He emptied Dad's retirement account. These were not mistakes. Well, if you had been around more, maybe you would have noticed something was wrong. She countered, anger flashing in her eyes. You abandoned this family to build your fancy career, while Austin stayed close to home. My father placed a restraining hand on her arm. Diane, he said quietly. Stop. Cecil is here now trying to help. Austin admitted what he did. Only because he was caught, she snapped, but there were tears in her eyes. My beautiful boy, my Austin. How could this happen? In that moment, I realized that my mother's favoritism toward Austin went beyond simple preference. She had built her entire identity around being the mother of a perfect, successful son. Austin's fall from grace was not just a betrayal of her trust, but a shattering of her self-image. Over the following weeks, I consulted with lawyers about my parents' options. Given Austin's confession and the extent of the fraud, there was a clear case for criminal charges, but that would mean watching my brother go to prison, something neither I nor my parents could bring themselves to pursue. Instead, we developed a repayment plan. I would help my parents restructure their debt and cover the most immediate expenses. Austin would enter a residential treatment program for his gambling addiction, followed by a strict monitoring of his finances and mandatory therapy. During this time, I discovered something else that both surprised and saddened me. My parents had known more than they admitted about Austin's troubles. They had noticed the signs of his gambling addiction years ago, but had chosen to believe his excuses and cover stories rather than confront the truth. We did not want to believe he could fail, my father confessed during a private conversation. We had always told everyone how perfect he was. How could we admit we were wrong? And what about me? I asked the question that had lingered in my heart for decades, finally finding voice. Why was I never good enough? My father looked genuinely perplexed. You were always so independent, Cecil. You did not seem to need our approval the way Austin did." I laughed incredulously. "Dad, I spent my entire childhood trying to get you and Mom to notice me, to be proud of me the way you were of Austin." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I suppose we got used to thinking of you as the strong one, the one who would be fine no matter what. Austin always seemed more fragile somehow, like he would break if we did not constantly prop him up." It was a painful irony. My independence, born of necessity from years of emotional neglect, had been interpreted as strength, while Austin's neediness, cultivated by years of coddling, had been seen as requiring additional support and attention. Through all of this, I continued meeting with Dr. Willis, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. She helped me navigate the complex emotions that the confrontation and its aftermath had unleashed. "You are experiencing a form of grief," she explained during one session. "Not just for the money that was taken, but for the family narrative you have lost. The story you all told yourselves about who you were to each other was never true." She was right. I was mourning the loss of a family that had never really existed, a brother who had been more myth than reality, and parents whose love had been more conditional than I had allowed myself to believe. "What do I do now?" I asked her. "I cannot just abandon them, but I cannot keep being the unappreciated safety net either." "You establish boundaries," she said simply. "You decide what kind of relationship you want going forward, based on honesty rather than illusion. And you communicate those boundaries clearly and consistently." And so, armed with this advice and a new understanding of my family's dynamics, I prepared for the difficult conversations that would determine whether we could build something new from the ashes of our old relationships. 3 months after the Thanksgiving confrontation, I sat in my car outside my parents' house, gathering my courage. This meeting would be different from the tense, emotional encounters of the past few months. Today, I would be laying out my terms for continued involvement in my family's lives, a set of boundaries that Dr. Willis had helped me formulate. Austin had completed his initial 30-day inpatient treatment for gambling addiction and was now living in a halfway house, attending daily support group meetings and working a modest job at a local bookstore. It was a far cry from his executive pretensions, but there was a new authenticity to him that I found myself cautiously respecting. My parents had moved from denial to a fragile acceptance of their new reality. The second mortgage that Austin had taken out on their house meant they would need to sell and downsize. My father's health had stabilized, but the stress of recent events had taken its toll. I knocked on the door, noticing that the lawn had been recently mowed and the flower beds weeded. Small signs of life returning to normal, or at least a new normal. My mother answered, looking older but somehow more present than I had seen her in years. "Cecil," she said, stepping back to let me in. "Austin is already here." In the living room, my father sat in his usual chair, while Austin perched uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. The wall that had once been covered with Austin's trophies and accomplishments now held only family photos, many of which included me images I had never seen displayed before. "Thank you all for meeting today." I began sitting down across from them. "I have given a lot of thought to where we go from here as a family." I explained the financial arrangements I had made. I would help my parents with the down payment on a smaller condo in a nearby retirement community. I would continue to contribute to my father's medical expenses, but there were conditions. "I need acknowledgement of what happened," I said, looking at each of them in turn. Not just Austin's theft, but the years of favoritism and dismissal that created the environment where this could happen. My mother started to protest, but my father placed his hand over hers. "Let him finish, Diane." "Austin," I continued, "I am willing to help you rebuild your life, but you need to continue treatment and make amends. Not just to me, but to everyone you have hurt, including your ex-wife and children." My brother nodded, his eyes clear and present in a way they had not been in years. "I understand," he said quietly. "I am trying." And Mom, Dad, I turned to my parents. I need you to see me. Really see me for who I am and what I have accomplished. Not as a lesser version of Austin, not as the reliable son you could ignore because I would always be there, but as Cecil, your son who has built a life to be proud of. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We do see you, Cecil. These past months you have been our rock while Austin has. She trailed off, unwilling to criticize her favored son even now. While I have been getting the help I needed, Austin finished for her. Cecil has been the strong one, the successful one. He always was. You just could not see it. My father cleared his throat. We made mistakes, son. Terrible mistakes that hurt both of you in different ways. I cannot change the past, but I want to do better, going forward. It was the most direct acknowledgement I had ever received from my father. And though it was long overdue, I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. We talked for hours that day, setting boundaries, making promises, and for perhaps the first time truly seeing each other as flawed, complex individuals rather than the roles we had been assigned in our family drama. Austin agreed to continue his recovery program and to begin making small, symbolic repayments more as a gesture of commitment than any realistic expectation of repaying the full amount he had taken. My parents agreed to attend family therapy sessions and to make a conscious effort to recognize and celebrate my accomplishments. I agreed to maintain my financial support with clear boundaries and expectations, to give Austin a chance to rebuild our brotherly relationship, and to open myself to the possibility that my parents could change even after all these years. As the months passed, our family began a slow, sometimes painful transformation. The weekly family therapy sessions were often tense, with old patterns emerging and needing to be consciously dismantled. My mother struggled the most. Her identity, so wrapped up in Austin's success, that acknowledging the reality of his failings and my achievements required a fundamental reshaping of how she saw herself as a mother. Austin continued his recovery, marking 6 months sober from gambling, with a small celebration that felt more genuine than any of his previous successes. He began tentatively rebuilding his relationship with his children through supervised visits and regular video calls. A year after the confrontation, we gathered again for Thanksgiving. This time, the setting was my parents' new condo, a comfortable but modest space that represented their new reality. Austin brought a dessert. He had baked himself a simple apple pie that he proudly announced contained no deception, just apples and cinnamon. My parents had invited a few neighbors, rather than the extended family, perhaps not yet ready to address the dramatic changes in our family narrative with a wider audience. I brought my girlfriend Sarah, whom I had been dating for 6 months, the first time I had ever brought someone home to meet my family. As we sat around the table, my father asked me to share news about my recent promotion to Chief Technology Officer at my company. My mother listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed she had made an effort to understand what I actually did for a living. Austin spoke honestly about his continuing recovery and his hopes to eventually return to school to study counseling, a way to use his own experience to help others. There were still awkward moments, old habits that emerged unconsciously, but they were acknowledged and gently corrected, rather than allowed to fester. When my mother began to slip into comparing Austin and me, she caught herself looking embarrassed. I am sorry, that is an old habit. I am still working to break. After dinner, as Sarah and my mother cleared the dishes, my father and Austin asked me to join them on the small balcony overlooking a community garden. The November air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. I want you to know, my father said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, that I am proud of you, Cecil, not just for what you have accomplished in your career, but for the man you have become despite our failures as parents. Austin nodded in agreement. You showed more strength and integrity in how you handled all of this than I have shown in my entire life. I will always be grateful for the chance to try to be a better brother to you. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from the familiar pain of rejection, but from the unexpected balm of acknowledgement. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you know." As we stood there in the fading light, I realized that the weight I had carried for so long, the constant striving to prove my worth to people who could not see it, had finally begun to lift. The healing was not complete, and perhaps never would be, but it had begun in earnest. The family we were becoming was not perfect, not the idealized image my parents had clung to for so long, but it was real, built on truth rather than illusion, on acceptance rather than impossible expectations. I had spent my life believing that I would never be as good as my brother, measuring myself against a standard that was not only unfair but ultimately revealed to be a fiction. The irony was that in freeing myself from that comparison, in standing up and saying enough, I had found something more valuable than approval. I had found self-respect and the beginnings of genuine family bonds based on who we truly were, rather than who we pretended to be. As we walked back inside to join the others, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass door. The man looking back at me was not defined by his relationship to his brother, not measured by his parents' approval, but standing firmly on his own accomplishments, his own integrity, his own worth. That, I realized, was the true victory. Not proving I was as good as Austin, but understanding that I had never needed to be. I was Cecil, and that had always been enough. Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations that never seemed fair? Like this video, if you have ever had to set boundaries with loved ones who could not see your true worth, subscribe for more stories about finding your own path, even when others try to define it for you. Share in the comments how you have dealt with family comparisons or favoritism. I read every comment and would love to hear your experiences. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply be yourself, regardless of who others want you to be.